The Early Childhood Worker Retention Payment. What is the Worker Retention Payment? There is a crisis in the early childhood space, with staff fleeing the sector and workloads getting heavier. As a result, the federal government has introduced a temporary payment to keep workers in the sector. This payment will apply to everybody who works within a centre, including educators, carers, and cooks. The grant only applies to staff who work in centre-based daycare services and USH services. At this stage, it does not include preschools. However, if a centre contains both long daycare and a preschool, then the centre will be eligible. So how much will your pay increase? When the federal government first announced this grant, it only applied to the private sector. The USU successfully fought to have it expanded to local government, and as a result, the guidelines are based on the private sector. Over the next 2 years, there will be a 15% increase to the private sector's minimum rate. There was a 10% increase in December of 2024, and there will be an additional 5% increase in December of 2025. The 15% increase to the private sector's minimum will be translated into a dollar amount for workers in local government. Let's look at an example and compare between the private sector and local government. Both of these workers are at the same level, and both are eligible for the payment. The private sector educator's minimum is $36.72. With the additional 10%, their rate is brought up to $40.41. This is an increase of $3.69. Therefore, if a local government educator's base rate is $39.72, they will receive a $3.69 increase rather than a percentage, bringing their rate up to $43.41. If you are paid above the award rate, you will still get the payment. So what must councils do? They must sign onto the Splinter Award. They must agree to cap their fees at 4.4% for 2025, and they must apply to the Department of Education. If your council applies by June 30th of 2025, you will get back pay to December of 2024. If your council applies after June 30th of 2025, you will not receive back pay. If your council doesn't apply at all, you will not receive this payment. If you are full-time, you could be losing an additional $4,000 to $7,000 per year. So what can you do? Visit the USU webpage for updates on the worker retention payment. Check to see if your council has signed on to the grant. If your council hasn't signed on, sign the petition. Scan our QR code for the latest information about the worker retention payment.